The tow truck's hook was already under my truck's axle when I ran outside in my socks, screaming that this was my own driveway, my own land. The driver just shrugged and said the HOA president signed the order herself, badge and all, like she owned the whole street. That woman was Karen Whitfield. And in 30 seconds she turned a quiet Tuesday morning into the start of a war I never asked for. My name is Dana Ruiz, 34, a structural engineer. And until that morning I thought a homeowners association was just paperwork and paint colors. I had no idea I was about to become the resident who finally took Karen down, one document at a time. 2 years earlier, my husband Marco and I bought our first house in Cedar Hollow Estates, a tidy little subdivision outside Charlotte. We loved the oak trees, the cul-de-sac quiet, the way neighbors waved from their porches like something out of an old sitcom. Nobody warned us that the HOA board came with its own queen, and her name was Karen Whitfield. Karen had chaired the board for 11 years, unopposed, because nobody else wanted the headache of dealing with her. She measured grass height with a ruler and mailed violation notices before the ink on our closing papers had dried. The first year was small stuff, a mailbox post an inch too tall, a garden gnome she called an eyesore in an email with 4 exclamation points. I laughed it off. Marco said to pick our battles. We didn't know Karen never stopped picking hers. Then she fined the Pattersons $600 for a flag she claimed violated uniform aesthetic standards. Old Mr. Patterson was a Vietnam veteran. The flag was American. Karen didn't care. Whispers started at the mailbox cluster. Everyone had a Karen story, but nobody had ever beaten her. She knows the bylaws better than the lawyer who wrote them, neighbor Priya warned me over the fence one evening. I didn't believe any one person could hold a whole street hostage. I was about to learn otherwise. It started with paint. We repainted our shutters a soft sage green, matched exactly to a swatch from the approved HOA palette. Karen mailed us a violation letter within 4 days, claiming the color was unapproved seafoam, and demanding we repaint within 30 days. I sent her the photo of the paint can, the exact code, the HOA's own binder page. She never replied. Instead, a second letter arrived, doubling the fine and adding a line about pattern of noncompliance. Marco wanted to just repaint it and move on. I wanted an explanation. Karen wanted control. At the next open meeting, I stood up and calmly asked why our paint, matched to their own approved list, had been rejected. 24-foot Karen smiled the way a shark smiles right before it turns, and said the final aesthetic judgment was hers alone. Someone in the back row snorted. Karen's eyes snapped toward them like a hawk locking onto a rabbit. Any other troublemakers tonight? She asked the room. And the room went silent, because everyone had seen what happened to troublemakers. I sat back down, cheeks burning, and made a decision that would define the next 6 months of my life. I would keep every letter, every photo, every email, time-stamped and organized, whether Karen liked it or not. That night I created a folder labeled simply Evidence, never guessing how thick it would eventually become. A week later, Karen fined us again, this time for a lawn ornament that turned out to be our recycling bin, briefly visible before pickup. I started noticing a pattern. The fines always landed on residents who had questioned her, never on her own circle of allies. Her best friend, Denise, had a trampoline blocking half the sidewalk. Not a single letter ever arrived at that house. Small mercies felt suspicious now. I began photographing not just my own yard, but the whole street, quietly, methodically. Marco thought I was overreacting. It's just an HO, Dana. Not a crime syndicate, he said, only half joking. He didn't know yet how right and how wrong he was at the same time. Then came the letter that finally cracked something open in me, a $2,000 special assessment for a pool resurfacing we never voted on. I checked our bylaws. Any assessment over $500 required a resident vote with 30 days notice. There had been no vote. No notice. Just an invoice. And a threat of a lien on our house if we didn't pay. That was the moment I stopped seeing Karen as a nuisance and started seeing her as a threat to something I'd worked years to build. I called my cousin Priya's husband, Avery Coleman, a real estate attorney who'd handled 2 other HOA disputes in the county. Avery listened to 15 minutes of my story without interrupting, then said one sentence I'll never forget: start documenting everything. Right now. Today. I already have, I told him. And for the first time in weeks, I heard him laugh with something like relief. Good, he said. Because women like Karen Whitfield don't fall to arguments. They fall to paperwork. That night, Marco finally sat beside me at the kitchen table, staring at the growing evidence folder, and said, "Okay, I'm in." We agreed on a plan: comply publicly, document privately, and never, ever let Karen see us rattled. It felt like preparing for a slow-motion chess match against someone who thought she was the only one who knew the rules. I didn't know yet just how many rules Karen had already broken. Quietly, for over a decade. The unfair assessment letter arrived on a Friday. By Monday, 3 other families had quietly messaged me, saying they'd gotten the same demand. None of them had voted on it either. None of them had been told a vote even happened. I started a private group chat, just 5 neighbors at first, calling it, half-jokingly, Cedar Hollow Truth Squad. Within a week it had 14 members, all trading screenshots of fines, all comparing notes on Karen's uneven enforcement. Priya found something enormous: HOA meeting minutes from 3 years back, buried on an old shared drive, showing the pool assessment was voted down. Karen had simply resubmitted the same charge 2 years later, hoping nobody would remember the first vote had failed. She's not just controlling, Priya said, voice shaking with anger. She's stealing. And she's been doing it for years. I felt something shift in my chest, not fear anymore, but a cold, clear kind of resolve. Avery told us to keep quiet a while longer. Let her think she's winning, he said. Karen's always overreach when nobody's watching. We agreed, even though every fiber in me wanted to march to the next meeting and read that old vote aloud. Patience, Avery reminded me, wasn't surrender. It was strategy dressed up as silence. I didn't know yet that Karen was about to hand me the biggest weapon of all, a tow truck, my driveway, and a very illegal signature. That brings us back to the morning it all exploded, my truck up on a hook, in my own driveway, for a violation that didn't exist. The tow driver, a tired-looking man named Reggie, showed me the paperwork Karen had emailed him that morning. It listed our address, claimed unauthorized commercial vehicle parked on common property, and bore Karen's signature as board president. Problem was, our driveway wasn't common property. It was ours, deeded, surveyed, paid off 2 years early. Sir, this is private land, I said, hands shaking as I pulled up our property survey on my phone. Reggie glanced at the boundary lines, then at the truck already 3 feet off the ground, and swore under his breath. Lady, I just tow where they tell me to tow, he said, but he lowered the hook anyway, unwilling to risk his own license. I called Avery before Reggie's truck had even left the cul-de-sac, my voice cracking with fury. She authorized a tow of a vehicle on your private, deeded property, Avery repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words. Dana, that's not a bylaw violation. That's theft. Grand theft. Technically, given your truck's value, he added, and I could hear him already typing. Neighbors had gathered on their porches. Phones out. Recording everything, the truck lowered back down. Karen's name on the paperwork. My raised voice. Someone posted a 10-second clip online with the caption, HOA Karen tried to steal a truck off private land. By lunchtime it had 11,000 views. By dinner, 40,000. Karen, of course, had an explanation ready before the video even trended. She always did. She claimed a clerical error had listed the wrong address, that she meant to tow the Pattersons' work van instead. Nobody believed her, especially not the Pattersons, whose van had been parked in their own garage all morning. Avery filed an official incident report with the county that same afternoon, citing unauthorized towing from private property. This is exactly the paper trail we needed, he told me, calm as ever. She just handed us Exhibit A. That night, Karen sent a mass email to the entire neighborhood, calling the video misleading and accusing me of harassment against board leadership. I almost laughed. The woman who found a veteran's flag was calling me the aggressor. But I noticed something in her email's tone, a flicker of panic dressed up as confidence, like she knew this one had gone too far. The next morning, a second video surfaced, dashcam footage from a neighbor showing Karen personally directing the tow truck to my driveway. Get it off his land. I don't care whose name is on the deed, she was heard saying. Clear as day. That single sentence would come back to haunt her more than any fine ever could. Avery called it an admission against interest, legal language, he said. For she just confessed on camera. Grand theft of a vehicle over $5,000 is a felony in this state, he told me. Your truck's worth triple that. I sat with that word, felony, turning it over in my mind like a stone I couldn't quite believe I was holding. Karen, however, doubled down instead of backing off, mailing me a formal violation notice for defamatory social media conduct. She threatened to fine me $500 a day until the videos came down. Avery actually laughed out loud when I read him that letter. She's trying to fine you for filming a crime she committed, he said. Let her try. I didn't take the videos down. If anything, I backed them up in triplicate. The Cedar Hollow Truth Squad group chat exploded that week, growing to nearly 30 households, all sharing their own Karen horror stories. One family had been fined for a wheelchair ramp Karen called unsightly. Another had been threatened over a child's above-ground pool. Patterns emerged that even I hadn't expected. Karen's fines landed disproportionately on the newest, youngest, or most vulnerable homeowners. Older, established residents, especially her personal friends, seemed to live in an entirely different neighborhood, one with no rules at all. I brought this pattern to Avery, printed and highlighted, and watched his eyebrows climb higher with every page. This isn't just overreach anymore, he said. This looks like a pattern of selective enforcement. That's discovery gold in a lawsuit. For the first time, I let myself imagine an ending where Karen actually lost. Publicly, completely. But Karen wasn't finished. She scheduled an emergency board vote to have me formally reprimanded and stripped of voting rights in the HOA. The agenda item read, Resident Conduct Violation, D. Ruiz. She hadn't even bothered to hide her target. I walked into that meeting with Avery beside me, a folder of evidence in my lap, and a calm I didn't know I still had. The community room was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it, folding chairs dragged in from a closet nobody knew existed. Karen sat at the head table, gavel in hand, radiating the same confidence she'd worn for 11 unchallenged years. We're here, she announced, to discuss Ms. Ruiz's pattern of hostile behavior toward this board. I raised my hand, and for once, she had to call on me, because 30 neighbors were watching. Before we discuss my behavior, I said, can the board explain the dashcam video of you ordering a tow off private, deeded land? A murmur rolled through the room like a wave hitting rocks. Karen's smile flickered. Just barely, just enough. That was a misunderstanding, she snapped, and irrelevant to tonight's agenda. Avery stood, introduced himself as legal counsel, and calmly stated that ordering removal of a vehicle from private property without owner consent met the legal definition of theft. Furthermore, he added, our review of assessment records shows at least one charge, the pool resurfacing fee, was billed despite a documented failed vote 3 years prior. The room went utterly silent. Even Karen's usual allies on the board exchanged uneasy glances. That vote was revisited, Karen stammered. The first crack I'd ever heard in her voice. Revisited where? Avery asked pleasantly. We found no record of a second vote. No notice. No minutes. Just an invoice. Denise, Karen's closest ally, shifted in her seat, suddenly very interested in her own fingernails. I felt something in the room tip, like a seesaw finally reaching balance after years leaning one direction. Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel, insisting the meeting return to the actual agenda item. But 30 residents weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. Actually, said Mr. Patterson, standing slowly, cane in hand, I think we'd all like to hear more about that pool vote. One by one. Other residents stood, the wheelchair ramp family, the pool family, 3 others I barely knew, each with a folder, a story, a grievance. It was as if my evidence folder had somehow multiplied itself across the entire neighborhood overnight. Karen's gavel hand trembled slightly as she tried, and failed, to reclaim the room. This meeting is adjourned, she announced abruptly, though no vote had called for it. You can't just end it because you don't like where it's going, Avery said calmly, still standing, still filming for the record. I watched Karen's practiced composure slip, just for a heartbeat, into something closer to fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety this time, but from something sharper, anticipation. Avery called the next morning with news. He'd filed a formal police report regarding the tow, citing theft and the dashcam confession as evidence. Grand theft over $5,000 requires a felony charge in this county, he reminded me. Your truck alone qualifies. A detective named Ruiz, no relation. We joked nervously, was assigned to review the case within the week. Karen, meanwhile, sent another mass email. This time claiming she was the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign by disgruntled residents. It read less like a defense and more like a woman watching her kingdom crumble in real time. The Truth Squad group chat had grown to over 40 households by then, and someone had started a shared spreadsheet of every questionable fine going back 6 years. We found something that made my stomach drop, a pattern of assessments routed through a landscaping company owned by Karen's brother-in-law. Every special project, repaving, resurfacing, tree removal, had gone to the same company, always slightly overpriced, always approved without a vote. Avery went very quiet reading that spreadsheet. This isn't just bylaw abuse anymore, he finally said. This might be embezzlement. I felt a chill despite the warm evening. Karen wasn't just a control freak. She'd been quietly profiting off her own neighbors for years. We brought the spreadsheet to the county's HOA oversight office, along with the tow report and the dashcam footage. The clerk who reviewed it whistled low and said, "Ma'am, I think you're going to want a forensic accountant, not just a lawyer." Avery knew one, a sharp, unflappable woman named Grace Okafor who specialized in exactly this kind of hidden theft. Grace took one look at the spreadsheet and said, "Give me 2 weeks and full access to the HOA's financial records." Karen, predictably, refused to hand over the records voluntarily, citing board confidentiality. Avery smiled when he heard that. Refusing an audit request after a fraud allegation, he said, is basically a confession with extra steps. He filed a subpoena the very next day, backed by the growing pile of resident complaints and the tow theft report. Karen tried one last desperate move. She called an emergency executive session, locking residents out entirely. But 2 board members, rattled by everything they'd learned, refused to attend, breaking her quorum entirely. Without a quorum, Karen legally couldn't hold any binding vote at all, a rule, ironically, that she herself had once used against a resident. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the Truth Squad chat, which erupted into a flurry of laughing emojis within minutes. Karen posted a stiff, formal statement online insisting the unauthorized gathering of a few residents changed nothing. But subscriber counts on the local Cedar Hollow Facebook group told a different story. It had tripled in a week. Every post now about her. Local news picked up the story after someone submitted the dashcam clip to a reporter named Felicia Grant. HOA president caught ordering illegal tow from residents' private land. The headline read, and it spread fast. Karen's photo, mid-gavel slam, ended up on 3 different news segments within 48 hours. Grace Okafor's forensic audit came back 2 weeks later, and it was worse than any of us had imagined. Over 4 years, more than $82,000 in HOA funds had been funneled through Karen's brother-in-law's landscaping company. Invoices were inflated by nearly 40% above market rate, with no competing bids ever solicited. Ever. Several special assessments, like the mysterious pool fee, existed solely on paper. The actual work was never even performed. The community pool, it turned out, had never been resurfaced at all. The old, cracked tile was still there under fresh paint. Grace called it one of the cleanest embezzlement patterns I've seen from a volunteer board, and I've seen a lot. Avery filed a civil complaint on behalf of the Truth Squad residents, citing breach of fiduciary duty and fraudulent billing. Simultaneously, the detective on the towing case confirmed the dashcam footage was admissible, and formal theft charges were being drafted. I remember sitting at my kitchen table when Avery called with the words I'd been waiting months to hear. "Dana," he said, "the DA's office is filing grand theft charges against Karen Whitfield. For your truck." Today. I didn't cry. I laughed, loud and sudden, until Marco came running from the other room to see if I was okay. Karen was formally served at her own front door, in front of 2 Truth Squad neighbors who happened to be walking by with very convenient phones out. The video of her face when the officer said, "grand theft of a motor vehicle," would later become the most replayed clip of the entire saga. Her carefully maintained composure finally, completely, shattered. "This is absurd," she shouted at the officer. Loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear. "I run this neighborhood." "Not anymore, ma'am," the officer replied flatly. And something about his calm made the moment even sweeter. Word spread through Cedar Hollow faster than any HOA newsletter ever had. By evening, someone had taped a printout of the news headline to the community mailbox kiosk, right where Karen usually posted her violation notices. The embezzlement findings hit local news the following day, paired with the theft charges, turning Karen into the subject of the whole county's dinner conversations. Denise, her closest ally, resigned from the board within hours, releasing a statement claiming she had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. Nobody in the Truth Squad believed her for a second, but nobody had the energy left to fight two battles at once. The remaining board members called an emergency, properly quorate meeting, and voted unanimously to suspend Karen from all board duties pending investigation. For the first time in 11 years, Cedar Hollow Estates had a board meeting with no Karen Whitfield gavel in sight. It felt strange, almost too quiet, like a storm had finally passed after years of low gray skies. I sat in the audience that night, Marco's hand in mine, and let myself actually breathe for the first time in months. But the fight wasn't over. A criminal case still meant weeks of depositions, evidence review, and Karen's increasingly erratic public statements. She hired a defense attorney who tried to spin the toe as a governance dispute, insisting criminal court was the wrong venue entirely. The dashcam audio, played in full at the probable cause hearing, made that argument evaporate within minutes. "Get it off his land. I don't care whose name is on the deed," echoed through the courtroom, and even the judge's eyebrows lifted. The judge set trial for grand theft and, pending the fraud investigation's conclusion, additional embezzlement charges to follow. Karen's lawyer requested a plea deal almost immediately after that hearing, sensing exactly how bad the video looked to any future jury. The deal, backed by Grace's meticulous audit and Avery's mountain of documentation, refused to offer anything close to leniency. "When the evidence is this clean," the assistant DA told reporters, "we don't need a plea. We need a verdict." Meanwhile, the Truth Squad civil suit moved forward separately, seeking restitution of every improperly billed dollar, including my own towing costs. I sat through 6 hours of deposition, answering Karen's lawyer's increasingly desperate questions with nothing but calm, documented fact. "Isn't it true you filmed MS Whitfield without her consent?" the lawyer asked, grasping at anything. "North Carolina is a one-party consent state," Avery interjected smoothly. "My client's recordings are entirely legal." The lawyer had no follow-up. There rarely was one. Once Avery got involved, Karen, out on bail, was legally barred from HOA property, meaning she couldn't even walk her own streets' common areas without violating her release conditions. Neighbors reported seeing her peek through her blinds during community events she used to run like a general commanding troops. It was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the veterans' flag fine, the pool that was never really fixed, the $82,000 in stolen community funds. Sympathy dissolved fast after that, replaced by something closer to grim, patient satisfaction. Trial was set for late autumn, 6 months after the day my truck had been hooked up in my own driveway. In the meantime, the interim board, cautious and humbled, refunded every improper fine on record, including the Patterson's flag citation. Mr. Patterson framed his refund check next to a photo of his old flag, hanging it proudly in his front window. Cedar Hollow slowly began to feel like an actual neighborhood again, not a fiefdom. I kept every piece of correspondence, every folder, every screenshot, filed neatly, because I'd learned the hard way that documentation was the only real power a resident had. Avery told me once, half joking, that I should have been a paralegal. I told him I'd rather just be someone who never had to fight this hard again. But first, there was a trial to finish, and Karen Whitfield had one final act of denial left to perform. Jury selection took 2 days, longer than expected, because half the potential jurors had somehow already seen the dashcam video online. The judge finally seated 12 residents from outside Cedar Hollow, none of whom had ever met Karen Whitfield in person. The prosecution opened with a single, devastating sentence. This is a case about a woman who believed a gavel gave her the right to steal. They played the dashcam footage first, letting Karen's own voice do most of the prosecution's work for them. Several jurors visibly flinched at, "I don't care whose name is on the deed," exactly as I had months earlier, in my own driveway. Then came Grace Okafor, walking the jury through $82,000 in inflated invoices with the calm precision of a surgeon. Every single project, she testified, was awarded without competing bids, to a company owned by the defendant's brother-in-law. The defense tried to argue Karen had simply trusted family, a claim that landed with visible skepticism across the jury box. When I took the stand, Avery had prepped me for hours, but nothing quite prepared me for meeting Karen's eyes across the courtroom. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her clipboard and her gavel and her 11 years of unquestioned authority. "Can you describe the morning of the incident?" the prosecutor asked. And I did, plainly, without embellishment, because the truth needed no decoration. "I ran outside in my socks," I said, "because a stranger was about to drive away with my truck. From my own driveway. On my own land." A few jurors actually smiled at the socks detail, small, human moments that somehow made the whole ordeal feel real to them. Karen's defense attorney tried one final gambit, suggesting I had provoked the situation through prior HOA disputes. "Is fighting a fraudulent $2,000 assessment provocation?" Avery asked during redirect. And the objection that followed only underlined how weak the argument was. Closing arguments took most of a Thursday afternoon, the prosecution methodically stacking theft, fraud, and abuse of power into one unbroken chain. "She didn't just take a truck," the prosecutor told the jury. "She took a community's trust, one signature at a time." The jury deliberated for just under 4 hours, remarkably fast. The courtroom clerk later told us, "For a case this complex, I sat beside Marco, Avery, and Priya in the gallery, hands cold despite the warm courtroom, waiting for 12 strangers to decide Karen's fate. When the foreperson stood, I realized I'd stopped breathing entirely without noticing." "On the count of grand theft of a motor vehicle," the foreperson read, "we find the defendant, Karen Whitfield, guilty." The room exhaled all at once, a collective sound I still hear sometimes in quiet moments. "On the count of felony embezzlement," the foreperson continued, "we find the defendant guilty." Karen's face went pale, then rigid, as if she genuinely hadn't believed this outcome was possible until the exact second it happened. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off, staring straight ahead at nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I found myself strangely quiet, letting Avery handle the cameras while I just stood in the sun. Sentencing came 3 weeks later, 18 months incarceration, 5 years probation, full restitution of the $82,000, plus my truck's towing and legal costs. The judge added one final line that made the whole courtroom go still, a permanent ban from ever serving on any homeowners association board in the state. Karen Whitfield, the woman who ruled Cedar Hollow with a ruler and a rulebook, would never hold a gavel again. I thought I'd feel triumphant, fireworks level victorious, but mostly I just felt tired, and quietly, deeply relieved. The Truth Squad group chat exploded with messages the moment the verdict hit local news. Half celebration, half disbelief that it had actually worked. Mr. Patterson texted a single line, "Told you the flag would fly again." I laughed until I cried. Finally, after months of holding it together, Cedar Hollow held its first real election in over a decade the following spring, and Priya, of all people, was voted in as the new president. Her first act was rewriting the bylaws to require a public vote on any assessment over $200, with mandatory competing bids for any contract. The pool finally got its real resurfacing, paid for in part by Karen's court-ordered restitution. Some nights I still drive past my driveway and remember the tow hook under my truck's axle, the terror of watching my own property nearly disappear. But mostly now I remember the folder, the group chat, the dashcam video, and the slow, patient work of turning outrage into evidence. Marco framed the local newspaper headline for our hallway, "Residents' Documentation Brings Down HOA Fraud Scheme." Karen Whitfield lost her board, her freedom for a while, her reputation, and every dollar she'd quietly stolen, All because she tried to steal one truck too many. I never wanted to be the neighborhood's cautionary tale. But I'll take it, because justice, it turns out, moves slowly right up until it doesn't.